Hey, how's it going, everyone? Justin again, as always. Thanks for watching my channel. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about tool borrowing 101. Some things you should know and my perspective on the matter. I have watched a handful of videos that talked about this specific topic, and I'll put the links down in the description, but I think there was only like 4 channels that actually discussed tool borrowing and how they perceive it and what their opinion is on the matter. So I'm going to tell you what it was like when I was borrowing tools or lending tools as a mechanic or technician, not only at the dealership but at the independent shop, and how they differentiate between the two. So number one, when I was at the dealership, we used to have the golden rule, okay, the golden rule that everyone followed, which was if you borrowed it more than 3 times, you had to buy your own. That rule got kind of old really quick, because there were certain times that you needed to borrow that tool and there were certain times that you didn't need it. So we changed the rule, me and a bunch of the younger technicians, call them millennial technicians, whatever, where we said, hey, if you borrow a tool more than 3 times within 1 working week, then you should buy your own. Pretty simple, standard, and almost similar to the actual point of the old school automotive mechanics or technicians that are out there, which is, you know, the golden rule, okay? But we changed it a little bit to accommodate the youth, because we realize that tools are expensive and it can be difficult to purchase those things, especially if you're at like $10 an hour. Let's face it, if you have a family and you have kids and you're just starting out, it's gonna be very difficult for you to buy everything that this trade has to offer and demand from you as a mechanic or technician. So we changed the rule to try to accommodate that, to try to help other people out. The reason why we kept it at the level that we did was because there were too many lube techs coming in and going out at the same exact time, and oftentimes tools would get either misplaced, broken, etc., etc. So we all paid attention to who was borrowing and who was using it, how they treated the tool, everything else. But it was the fact that if they used it more than 3 times in a work week, they should try to buy their own, because we still needed that tool. A lot of us were doing the same recalls that the lube techs were starting to do, whether they were staying there and they were moving on to the next level or they were getting kicked out. So something to consider. The independent shop is way different. It's very much family oriented, and you have to understand, especially if you're in a dealership, you have to take your mind out of the dealership mentality and put yourself into a family integrated mentality. And that transition took me about a year before I felt comfortable in doing that. Every single day, when I transitioned to the independent shop from a dealership, I locked my toolbox at the end of every single day. Then it became where after about 6 to 8 months of working there, I started locking it up only on weekends, just in case, you know, burglary, this, that, and the other. And then it came down to the point where I actually felt comfortable enough to where now I don't even lock my toolbox. I leave my service car open for, you know, any mechanic or tech to use as they see fit, so as long as they put it back when they're done. So way different than the dealership mentality. Dealership, I was the same way. Dealership, I would lock up every single night, unlock every single morning. I'd lock up at lunch, I'd unlock after I got off lunch. Here at the independent shop, now that I've been there for about a year, it stays unlocked. It's just what it is. But it took me almost an entire year to get that comfortable with the people that I work with. Nowadays, they're like family to me. They're my brothers, period. That's it. They're my brothers. I was going to say and sisters, but we don't have any females working with us, so forgive me for the pause. But at any rate, they're my brothers, man. We all get along. We all borrow from each other. Yes, we do ask. There are certain times that we'll ask the other person if we can borrow something, just not because we know that they're going to say yes or no. We ask just to give them the acknowledgement that they know where that tool is going to go. So that's the only reason why they would ask you. They would ask you because they want to make sure that you're aware that that tool is going to disappear for a little while, and if you're looking for it, hey, it's here. Now, if you take off for lunch or whatever, you have a medical appointment or something you got to go do, they're obviously not going to ask because you're not there to ask, but it's open. It's an open field, man. They know that you trust them, they trust you. Mi casa es su casa. So they borrow, they put it back. Now, the only key difference at the independent shop is when you start funneling in new people. So you go from this family-oriented atmosphere where everybody knows everybody knows what everybody has tool-wise, and who they can borrow from, who they can't borrow from, etc., etc. But for the most part, everybody borrows from everybody. But if you get a new guy, especially if he doesn't have any tools of his own, way different story. Now you have to try to break him in and let him know what's going on. This can be tricky at times because there are multiple toolboxes within the shop. He might be so new, he's not sure who he borrowed it from. Even though he just took it out of X box and used it on X car, he might not know, so he just leaves it wherever he leaves it, and then you have to go around and find it. So you try to train the new guy up to, hey, remember whose tool you're borrowing and make sure you bring it back. That's the golden rule for us now. It's not 3 strikes, you're out anymore. Now it's, hey, if you're gonna borrow it, bring it back when you're done. Not at the end of the day, not before you leave. Don't just leave it here because you don't know who it is. Ask around. Be courteous enough to ask around and say, hey, look, I borrowed this tool to do this job. I'm not sure who I borrowed it from. Be courteous enough to the people around you that loan you those tools to ask around who you borrowed it from, especially if you don't know. Say, hey, look, man, I was in a hurry. I was trying to grab a tool. So-and-so's box is right next to me. I grabbed it, and now their box has moved from this side of the shop to the other side of the shop. I'm not sure who I borrowed it from anymore. We can figure it out. Most of us as mechanics, especially independent shop, know who has what. We do. We know who has what, and it's really simple to figure out at the end of the day. That's not a big deal. But just make sure you make it known that you're having a trouble trying to figure out who you borrowed it from. Second thing is, so we have a starting lube tech. He's still trying to figure it out. He's like 15, 16 years old. He borrowed a cordless gun of mine to do a transmission fluid and filter service. Not a big deal. Didn't bother me at all. Hey, me casa su casa. I'm trying to funnel him into the independent shop lifestyle. But the downside of the whole deal of him borrowing it was I was at lunch, I come back, and I didn't need it right away. But when I went to turn to grab it, it wasn't there. And I was like, okay, so where did it go? It was in somebody else's service cart. Now here's where it gets fucked up. The entire cordless tool was saturated in automatic transmission fluid. And I was like, dude. And I knew who borrowed it because none of the other guys in the shop that I've known for the last 12 months would have ever done anything like this. And I was like, Jaron, did you borrow the fucking cordless impact to do the trans service? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, do you see how it's saturated in ATF everywhere? And he's like, yeah. I was like, you do realize that as you're dropping the pan, you can work your way out to where you're not getting the entire tool covered in ATF? He's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, then understand this. This cordless gun is worth more than your fucking truck. So if this gun doesn't work anymore, it's either A, you use an entire 2-week paycheck to pay for another one, or B, you give me the title to your pickup truck. Because that's what it's worth. His jaw dropped, of course, and he was like, oh, fuck, I didn't know. And I'm like, exactly. So that leads me to my next point. If you're new in a shop, understand the names of the tools that you're borrowing. Understand the cost of those tools. If you don't know, you need to educate yourself in the matter. Educate yourself in the matter. Because if you're borrowing a Matco, Snap-on, Cornwell, whatever cordless product, you have to understand it's going to be $200 or $300 for whatever it is that you're using. If you're borrowing something that's Harbor Freight, yeah, maybe it's only $50 to $150. Either way, the tool cost money, and it wasn't your money that you borrowed. It was somebody else's. So if you buck shit up and break it, you're going to have to either pay the cost or buy him a new one. So he was unaware of this factor, so I had to kind of fill him in a little bit. Hopefully he understands now, who knows. Another thing is if whether or not you're using a wrench or maybe you're using a ratchet, don't use them as a hammer. If they're not yours, do not use them as a hammer. Go get a hammer, okay? It's not your tools, it's somebody else's. They paid a lot of money for this stuff. So use the tool properly. That's another big thing. if you're going to use it improperly, you better make sure it's your tool or that the technician or mechanic is okay with it. Because it's not okay to take somebody's ratchet, wrench, crescent wrench, whatever, and just start whacking shit with it. You got to use the tool for what it was meant to use it for. If you're not, then don't borrow it, okay? Or get your own shit. And I get it. You're $10 an hour. It's really super difficult for you to afford stuff. You should be even more cautious at how you use somebody else's tools. Now, I'm not really big on cleaning stuff. Most of the times, if I use a tool and I got grease or oil on the end, I'll take a rag, give it a quick wipe, so that way it's not saturated in oil, and I'll put it back in my cart. Some automotive mechanics or technicians might want you to use a little bit of brake cleaner and clean off the grease and oil. I'm not that freaking picky, okay? Look, wipe the grease and oil off the crap and put it back, unless it's my cordless. There should be no reason why this thing is covered in oil or ATF or anything else, okay? It's got vents and it's got brushes and it's got moving parts inside of it. Don't get the fluid on it. Pretty simple request, especially if you're gonna borrow it. Another thing, breaker bars, soft grip handles versus plastic handles. Some technicians or mechanics may not want you to use brake cleaner on either one because either A, it's gonna eat away the lettering, or B, it's gonna crack and split the handle. This can happen. So, don't always clean the tool off with brake cleaner. Ask the mechanic or technician you're borrowing from what they would prefer you to clean their tools off, if they even want you to clean them off when they're done. Some mechanics may say, hey man, just use a rag, wipe it off, put it back. That's all I ask. Somebody hey, use brake cleaner. Somebody else might say, hey, use degreaser. Ask the mechanic or technician what you want them to do as far as like cleaning wise. Give it a quick wipe or spray it with something. And if you want me to spray it with something, what do you want me to spray it with? So keep that in mind. This is, again, just my tidbits, little tiny learning curves from borrowing or lending tools. Also, if you're gonna borrow a tool, especially like something like a ratchet, use it, get done with what you need to get done with, put it back. Because heavy line versus regular light maintenance is gonna be completely two different demons. If you see a guy taking apart a transmission or an engine, chances are you should probably borrow from somebody else that's not doing a major job. You should consider borrowing from somebody that's either A, doing a light repair job, or B, doing the same job you are, maybe a lube service, or maybe they're just doing some brake pads or an alignment or something like that. You might borrow from them first instead of borrowing from the guy that's doing the engine pull or the transmission pull or the clutch job or the intake job, because he's gonna need almost every tool that he has at his disposal in order to get that job done. Whereas the person that's doing brakes, alignment, steering, suspension, oil changes, etc., flushes and whatever, they might not need it at that specific moment. You might have a 5 to 15 minute window that you can borrow it and rush and put it back. But always put it back when you're done. Not at the end of the day, not 3 hours later. Use it for what you gotta use it for and put it back. Now that's if you don't have your own tools. If you have your own tools, great. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to those guys that don't have their own tools. So if you're just starting out, these are my tips and suggestions. Now I understand not every person, especially a teenager who's just doing it for a summer job, is gonna go out of their way to purchase all these tools, and I'm not saying that you should. At some point, you'll get your own service card, you'll fill it up with your own tools, but if you're working at an independent shop or even a dealership, which is kind of unlikely if it's a summer job, but if you're working in a lube tech shop or a mom and pop shop, and you're utilizing other people's tools, be courteous and understand what jobs they're performing before you actually go to borrow them. Be sure you know what brands they are actually using and how much those tools cost, so you don't end up having to spend an entire 2 weeks check on a tool that you broke because you didn't know how to use it. The best thing that I would do if I was you is to borrow from either the shop foreman or the shop owner. That's all I got for this video, guys. Thanks again for watching. As always, hit the like if you like the video. Hit the dislike if you dislike the video. Share, comment below if you have other suggestions for new automotive techs for borrowing tools and what your rules are on the matter. If you disagree with any of the things that I've said in this video, again, put it down in the comments. Let's have a discussion about it. That's all I got for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and deuces. We'll see you next time. Cheers.